Welcome everybody to Strategy Cafe. I'm really pleased to be here. Obviously, I'm working from home. You can tell from my background that I'm working from home this morning. I guess most of you probably are working from home as well. And my goodness me, how the world has changed over the last week or so for all of us. So, although we're planning to interview Richard Burge in a second, Richard is a mate of mine and a wonderful chap and chief executive of the London Chamber of Commerce International, so Commerce and Industry. So but he can tell you all about that in a second. We are going to take a moment just to slightly change course during the interview this morning and discuss what's happening right now and London's response. And while you're listening today, you will see on your dashboard, if you have a look on your GoToWebinar panel dashboard, excuse me, there's an area for questions. Put your questions in. It's a good opportunity just to talk this morning, and we'd be really pleased to talk a little bit more. Throughout the webinar, if you fire your questions in, I'll keep the questions area open, and as Richard and I just debate how to tackle the challenge in front of us and what London's going to do and what the status might be, and none of us know, we can pick up some of your questions and fire them in and see if we can find some answers for you. So it'd be great to have those. We're going to run up to the hour. You can stay on at 9 o'clock until maybe 9:10 if you have questions for Richard at the end. If there's more questions, we'll stay on for them. It seems like a good opportunity, so why not? And if you found some of the content from today's session useful, it'll be up on our YouTube channel and on our podcast channel, so you can share it with your colleagues and maybe play clips from it if you find some of the things we talk about today helpful. Please do. So this month, really pleased to have Richard with us. We met in a cafe, which I'm just going to chat about in a minute, to talk about his new gig as chief exec of the London Chamber, and he was talking about some of the fundamental things that the Chamber does, which I didn't know. And although I've done quite a bit in world trade, I have to admit my innocence and not knowing what a carnet is. So we decided to give this the title of what even is a carnet. So we'll get to that a little bit further down the track, which is really interesting, and actually very interesting in connection with London's post-Brexit trading role in the world and its position in terms of documentation of transport and freight. But we'll come back to that. Richard, welcome to Strategy Cafe.
Thank you.
Really delighted to have you on. Really enjoyed talking to you recently, and getting a little bit closer to you. You and I, you've helped me out quite a bit with the World Traders on our Tacitus lecture this last year, and I'm looking forward to doing the same in the following year. But this is in your proper guise as chief executive of the London Chamber. So tell everyone about you. Yeah, tell everyone about you and about your role, and a little bit about your background before the Chamber would be really useful.
Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Nick. I run the London Chamber of Commerce. This is week 9, so it's quite interesting. I'm learning how things are done normally in an atmosphere where things are not being done normally. I'm in the office, although there's nobody else here. This is our first day on complete remote working, except for one particular team, which I'll come back to in a minute. But a few of us are in just to make sure the whole thing does stand up and doesn't fall over. Yeah, so the job of the London Chamber of Commerce is to be the voice of business. I think our community, our tribe, our people and businesses who are in London, because it is a world city. That's why they're here. So they're either working in that world city dimension, or they're servicing the companies who are working in that dimension. And so, yeah, we do what chambers of commerce do, which is provide advice, provide access to information, give people the opportunity of meeting, develop new ideas. So we're going through quite a radical change in the way we do that to make ourselves a much more 21st century organization. But we also have this business side, which is the issuing of trade documentation and customs documentation, so certificates of origin and carnets. And so certificates of origin in many countries now are still bits of paper attached to the side of a container or to a package. But there's also carnets, which are documents which enable you to temporarily take kit into a country and take it out without having to pay any bond or any money to it, on the understanding you do take it home with you. You don't quietly sell it around the back of the shed. And to give you a good example of people who use that are Formula One teams. I mean, they have carnets all over the place for the kit they carry around the world, and we issue those. And we are authorized to issue that through a number of international treaties and also through agreement with HMRC and the Treasury. So that's what we do, and we run that as a business which supports the charitable, not-for-profit endeavor of the overall chamber. So that's what we do.
And tell us a little bit about a little about your background. There's if you look at the slide here, there's some some key bullet points. So just in like 30 or 40 seconds, just the career is quite varied.
Well, you could call it a career, or you could call it one gullible employer after another, really. So I've been very fortunate. I've had a sequence of jobs which I've really loved. I became a chief executive when I was 36, running the Zoological Society of London, just as it fell over into very public chaos with a famous fly on the wall documentary by Molly Dineen. And then I moved from there to running the Countryside Alliance, which was basically demos up and down the country. That was huge fun. I saw one end of this country to another, and it was such a privilege. Then I ran my own business for 6 years. My wife and I lived in France, rebuilding a house which could have made a Channel 4 documentary on its own. But I worked mostly in Africa when I was doing that. And then the financial crash came. Like a lot of businesses, I found it really difficult, but also I found it really important. I suddenly realized I was quite lonely, that clients are not colleagues. And I realized that it was important in my life, not just to be part of an organization, but to have workmates. And clients can't do that for you. So I went to see some headhunters and said, will anyone treat me seriously? And the Foreign Office did, and asked me to come and run Wilton Park, which is in the Sussex countryside. And we used to say our job there was to put people around the table to talk about things they really didn't want to talk about with people they really didn't want to talk about those things with. So anything with grit in the international system, be it conventional warfare, weapons of mass destruction, arms, human rights, economic, environmental stuff, anything where there was a problem. Our job wasn't to negotiate solutions, but our job was to actually get people back in the habit of engaging and talking with each other. And so that's it. And then I left that. And now I'm running the London Chamber, which is huge fun. I've got lots of lovely colleagues.
Great. Well, look, we'll come back to the chamber. So when you and I chatted, I mean, I know I was terrible. I was slightly late, and we managed to grab a coffee in Carluccio's, and we were just chatting about this.
I don't normally dine in Carluccio's.
They did lovely toast, if I remember correctly. So my curiosity in interviewing people about their careers and about leadership is, what are the key moments in life? There's the analytical side of things, isn't there? But fundamentally, there's always the human side. There's always the human side, the human spirit, and most people who have developed in leadership have had to tackle some fairly significant challenges, and they've had some big learnings, some sort of pathway changes along the way. I think you just mentioned one in passing in that opening bio, but the one and I was asking about deeply emotional moments. You talked about at some point in your career being hauled out of a car in Beirut at gunpoint, and how that has given you some different perspective on life. So just tell everyone about what happened and how this has affected you.
Well, there are thousands, tens of thousands of people in this world who have gone through that experience at least once, and there are thousands of people who go through it every day of their lives, and they can't avoid it. On the screen you've got in front of you is Beirut, a remarkable city. That's it rebuilt. When I was going there was a big band through the middle called the Green Line, right, which is basically, it looked like photos of Dresden after the war. And I was working with the British Council, having to go back and forth across the Green Line. One side was held largely by Hezbollah and others, and the other side was held by sort of Christian militia. And it was one of those things, coming back through the Green Line one night, a roadblock appeared in the middle of it out of nowhere, and within seconds I was outside the car, and it was at a softening stage. The hostages were all being released, but it was one of those moments and a couple of hours sitting there where you sort of thought about being in your own company for quite a long time. And so, yeah, it did have an effect. And I think the effect, though, came that I realized that, it put things in proportion for me. But other incidents have. But
What?
also, I think the most important thing for me is that I knew people went through this day in, day out of their normal lives, and that
Yeah.
I, along with every leader and person in the world, had a responsibility to try and make sure this, in some way, stopped being a normal part of life for so many thousands and millions of people.
What went through your mind, when you were stopped? What was going through your mind, and how? I'm curious as to how you, if you remember it, how you were reacting
Well,
to
the main
that.
thing was, you sort of prepared for this. You go on courses before you go to places like this, and the thing is not to panic, uh,
Yeah.
not to do anything irresponsible. To remember that there are other people around you, and if you do something stupid, they are possibly the ones who will bear the serious consequences, not you. So think about others.
Yeah.
And the other thing is just put your mind in a place where this could go on for some time. It's the army use this phrase, hurry up and wait. So get in the queue and just anticipate it landing there. But
Yeah.
we all go through this. Every one of us has it may not be as visually spectacular as getting hauled out of a car in Beirut, but everyone goes through this. I mean, I remember, one of the big experiences of my life was our son going on his first tour of Afghanistan. It was a combat tour, and you'd sort of wake up in the middle of the night and know that he was on patrol somewhere. But then you also then have a responsibility to try and help people balance that, because people can be unnerved by talking to you because they've got that experience. And my son was great like that. He always send back messages and things. I remember him once sending back a message, said, "Dad, we just come back from patrol." He said, "You can't believe how beautiful the Hindu Kush is when you're looking at it from the Helmand Valley in the morning, the
Yeah.
sun shining off it." And just things like that, put things back into proportion. There is beauty in the world, even in disaster.
I think it's these are just great lessons for us all. We did talk about maybe just picking up on this, and this is where all leaders are now. Helping. So one of your jobs as a leader is to, I guess, is to hurry up and wait. We were chatting about it just now, and one of the methods we use, or ways of thinking about it, is that whenever there's a big shock where the world suddenly proves itself not to be the way you thought it was, reality hits you in the face with a big slap. One of the first things that happens for most people is that they will panic, they will be shocked, they'll be angry. So it's a very emotional moment of fear and anger, and we are already seeing some of that, obviously, and the world is a very different place today, and then it takes a while for people just to settle down, and gradually sort of just accept that the world is the way it is now and sort of adjust to the new reality. But there's some really good lessons in what you're saying for people, going through that turmoil. And I think in a leadership position, you've got additional responsibility because you have to be prepared to try and give the lead to those around you and not let the consequences for them be led by their
Yeah,
feelings.
yeah. I think the main thing in these situations, I think there's two important things to try and just put in your mind, and it can be really hard. It can be really difficult, but there's two things you have to put in your mind is, first of all, do not do this alone. Find a buddy, find somebody to talk this through with. Do not sit
Yeah.
on your own. I mean, I remember during the foot and mouth crisis when I was in charge of the Countryside Alliance, our big fear were farmers sitting on tractors for hours, really just with their own brains running around these issues, and it's just a ghastly feedback loop with
Yeah.
nobody interrupting it. So don't be on your own. There's always somebody you can talk to. They may not fully understand it, but explain it to them. And the process of explaining it can often just give you a bit of clarity and a bit of proportion. The second thing is, put it in proportion. You are in a country which is not going to allow you to starve. And this is not a war. People are not going to appear on the streets shooting you. So put it in a bit of proportion. Give yourself a sense of, this is not as big a disaster as it can be in elsewhere, and that's not feeling sorry for other people, but it's also just giving yourself a bit of balance. And the final thing is, I'm just going to sound a bit clear, but do you know where this quotation comes from? Out of the ashes of disaster, grow the roses of success. Go on.
It's a lovely quote, and I'm going to suggest it's from some sort of ancient Greek warrior of some sort.
Oh, well, sort of, I suppose. It's actually from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So I'm not very well educated, but I do remember things from films. And it does. So think about, okay, I'm in this position. How do I now, this is where I am. I can't change that, but how do I change my future? How do I think about things? And when you think about bringing things out of growing roses in the ashes, is think about, okay, how do I plan that? How do I make sure I've got my resources lined up? Do a proper bit of business planning. I think one of the things I find very curious is people who are sole traders really don't plan their businesses. They just go from uh, thing to thing. I was on the BBC last night and I was being guided around by a young guy who's basically an actor and he was jobbing for the BBC. And I
Yeah,
said, so how do you think about yourself being a business? And he said, well, no, I just do the jobs. I said, why don't you plan your business? I said, plan yourself so when you're not in a Hollywood film, which is where you want to go to, how do you do that? What do you do in the meantime? How do you keep cash flow going? Think of yourself not just as a hired hand, think of yourself as a business and plan it. And the
yeah,
process of planning can sort of takes you away from the problem you're in, and it gives you a sense of purpose and mission and drive and get up and go for things. But the real thing is, please don't do this on your own. Try and find a mate, try and find a friend, talk it through. And my appeal to people who are on the other side of that is somebody comes to you and say, I just quite like to talk this through. Be open to it, create the time. That
yeah,
is what community is about. And if you go back to Beirut, time in Beirut and other places I've been to, the thing that has enabled those communities to come out of it is that sense of community, is the sense of people, not in an organized way, but in just a human way of giving time to each
yeah,
other,
yeah.
being a sense, we're here for you. Hugely important.
So we're doing some of those things. We're gonna, organizing using these online tools. We're organizing whole company meetings, across various different companies, just to let people talk. So just before we move on to talk about the chamber, I just want to chat about a momentary about emotions, about feelings.
Mm,
One of the things that we like to encourage people to have in their leadership kit bag is a grown-up relationship with feelings, because there's no such thing as an unfeeling human being, right?
no.
And we all know that actually you need those, you need motivation, you need a sense of hope. Some of the things that are fundamentally emotional states for us are what
Mm,
give us our drive and our purpose and our
mm,
our way forward in life. But we all know also that that things can go in the opposite direction. You can have a lot of negative feelings that really knock things apart and divide us. And I always say that, unless you can talk about those things and have a grown-up relationship with them, then certainly in business, but in almost, in any human community, it becomes very difficult. So I think your points about talking it out and dialing those down, or letting them come to a standstill, are good ones. I like the comment earlier on about needing company. I think it's a really good point for the moment, is to make sure that we
mm,
reach out and give everybody company and a chance just to talk,
mm.
and maybe just don't judge people for their feelings at the moment, and just let them say how they're feeling.
Yeah, I think there's a very, again, it's another quotation, but this is from a sort of like slightly more literary source, and it's one I've used quite a lot, in positions where I've been having to go and talk to people, like people running the British Council Library in West Beirut and places like that. And it's about your behaviour as a leader, and it comes from Henry V, and it's the chorus, and he's talking about Henry before Agincourt, and he says, "And forth he goes and visits all his host, and bids them good morrow with a modest smile. Upon his face there is no note of how dread an army hath surrounded them, nor doth he dedicate one jot of colour unto the weary and all watched night." And this is when Henry's going around in disguise, just talking to people, being available, and being that listener. So I think the danger of a leader is going around and being incredibly optimistic, saying this is dead easy. Um, what Henry was doing was going around and just being accessible and sharing the burden, but at the same time saying, we will get through this. We can get through this. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be some really hard things. There are going to be people we're talking to tonight who will not be with us by the end of the day tomorrow. And so it's a realism, but it's also a sense of determination. and you're giving people a sense that it will be difficult, but they have a leader who will see it through and will be with them. And so I think, Henry before Agincourt is a good role model for us all.
It's a wonderful quote, and really really great advice for everybody out there to listen to and go and use. We're just into the early stages of this, so it's all very ambiguous, and how it will unfold is unknown. So I really like your army quotes. You just tell me the army quote again. Get busy queuing or get busy waiting.
No, hurry up and wait.
Hurry up and wait. Okay.
Well,
Hurry up and wait.
I was never in the army. My father was in the army, and my son is in the army. So my wife and I live in acronym city. Remember, that's a profession where nobody uses joined-up handwriting. Complete waste of an education.
I love it. So acronym city. The new chief exec of the London Chamber is bringing us into acronym city, and there we go. So let's talk about that a little bit. So I'm just curious, moving on about, we will get through this and we'll come out the other side. And London has an incredible strengths. And you talked a little bit earlier on about what seems like a monopoly to me of these carnets, etc. So just come back to that and tell us a little bit about what that underlying sort of infrastructure in world trade is. You're talking about motor racing, which I thought was a really interesting example.
Well, I think it's about it. The trouble is, it's sort of quite 20th century, because it assumes most world trade is about things being taken around the world. And of course, one of the challenges I've now got, and I think is really exciting, is the things that go mostly around the world are people's ideas and their intellectual property. That's what we trade mostly now. That's what services is about.
You don't need a carnet for that.
You don't need a carnet for that. You need a visa. Or you need a webinar link. But also you need documentation, and you need a legal system that protects your IP. So you need proper contracting. So I see our organization moving, and it was in the process of doing this anyway, but curiously, out of the ashes of disaster, this incident may give us a huge opportunity for accelerating this very fast. We moving to a world where we are looking at how do we ease the flow of trade in ideas and brilliance, and recognizing that actually the flow of trade in goods is still hugely important, it's still hugely big, but in proportion, it now has another world that has to be dealt with. It's not a monopoly. It's one of those things which is sorted out. The chambers of commerce around the world have a role in this, and they actually issue it on behalf of governments. And so it's just a simple system. We run it very deliberately, and we work with other chambers of commerce around the country who we support in doing this, in order to make sure that it sort of supports our overall charitable endeavor. We don't have shareholders. We're not a distributive company. So in the end, all this money goes into our good causes, really.
Right.
So that's basically what, but I think the exciting thing is now is how do we do that? So I think there are two huge advantages London has. And in saying that London has it, that means we've got to make sure it is because London is part of the UK. The UK has the advantage of this, and London is its tool. And one of the things I really worry about with London is it gives this impression to the rest of the UK that the rest of the UK should be grateful for London. No, we need the rest of the UK. In the financial crisis, if it hadn't been for people all across Britain running small businesses, trading, growing crops, selling goods, making things, we would in London would not have been able to raise the international capital to get through and to raise those massive loans to get through the financial crisis. It just would not have done. Banks would have gone to the wall, because the great thing we have in the UK is an economic and social hinterland, and it's called Britain. So we've got to make London work for that. But I think what the huge thing that London can bring in the new world we face is two things. One is, in the 15 years it's taken us to fail to negotiate the great multilateral trade round of Doha, nearly 200 bilateral trade agreements have been signed. So we're in a bilateral world. They all have their own rules and regulations. And I think London, in the same way as London dominates and will continue to dominate the foreign exchange market, it is the natural place, because of the ecosystem here, to basically create the world in which we create the management, the wherewithal, the means by which those international trade documentation, be it for intangibles or manufactured goods, is run from here. We provide the engine to enable that to happen. And I think London as a community has really got to get together and make sure we exploit that. And then the second thing I think comes out of that is arbitration and mediation.
Right.
Contracts are going to get much more complex, more people, and there are more businesses in the world trading ideas. They're going to need contracts. The problem with contracts, when it says in that last paragraph, if there's a dispute, we resort to the laws of country X, means you're immediately into their legal system. It's incredibly complicated, takes forever, and is expensive. So arbitration and mediation becomes very important. I think London has a huge, huge advantage over any city in the rest of the world, is that we have judges in London who basically are completely independent and objective and enforce contracts. So this is the place where arbitration and mediation should take place, because you can go to an arbitrator, you can go to a mediator, and you know if the other party turns around and says, I don't like the result of that, I'm going to go to court, you know they are almost certain to lose, because the judge will say, did you sign on the dotted line and say you were going to go to arbitration? Did the arbitrator come from a recognized source? Yes. Get out of my court, and by the way, pay the other person all the costs. So
Sure.
this becomes the logical place to be the world center of arbitration and mediation. So those two things, running the way the world does trade in terms of the documentation, and that's particularly around new documentation we're going to need. We're going to need documentation about the emissions burden that goods carry. We're going to need documentation that guarantees that modern slavery hasn't been involved in the process. We're no longer looking at a certificate of origin being there is an origin and it goes to country X. We're looking at chains of custody going one to the other. So how do we produce documentation? So I think we are the ecosystem that can do that standing on our head. So we just got to get our act together now. And curiously, I think this episode is giving us a huge opportunity to set this up.
I think that's one of the things we've been talking about to everybody is get on with your digitization, and
oh God, yeah.
Partly that's about this. It's about speaking to people using the tools that we have available and widening your network and shortening the wasted time on journeys and widening and deepening the relationships using the tools that we've got. And some people have done that well over the last few years, but many people haven't really done that. And actually, just going through this crisis has been a huge shock to the system, because everyone has had to get their online tools together and ready for working from home. Just that first step, assuming everyone makes it through the crisis and comes out the other side okay, which we all will, but it'll be different. We all will, but it'll be different. I think the culture will change towards this, because an enforced quarter or 6 months of working in this way, people will get so used to it. I'm just interested in that digitization agenda going forwards. That must be a key part of moving away from a clerical world trading kind of methodology. Digitized must be something that's going to happen.
I think it's happening anyway. The point is, how do we use this ecosystem in London to make Britain the center of doing that in our bright new world that we face? We spend so much time looking back and thinking, well, only if something had been different. Well, it might have been different, but it ain't. I have this sort of slightly scientific approach that I think history tells you nothing about from describing where you are. It provides you with precious little advice and takes up a lot of airtime. I think it's the future that matters, and we can look back and say, well, we could have done that better. We could, fine, use that if that's going to be helpful in terms of making decisions for the future. But all of it's going to be is casting blame and saying, well, it could have been so much nicer. Well, we are where we are. End of story. Plan for the future and keep planning. It's always a plan B.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. I feel that there's an awful lot of meeting of minds in the coming at some of the core concepts about crisis management, how to handle a crisis.
Yeah, we should have coffee and collegios more often.
But also, we call it radical honesty. Just facing the world as it currently is, and then dealing with it practically, which maybe is the soldier's way of doing it, and seeing the beauty in the little things. Something that you said earlier. I think it's also
admitting. The other thing is, if you're in leadership, admitting you get it wrong. You're not perfect. Whoops, did that wrong. And I can look back on my career and I can, quite easily list all the things I wish I'd done completely differently. But there you go. Finally, I keep that in my head and don't do that again.
We learn from those things. It's
We
been
learn
it's
from
been
them.
great.
Yeah.
So look, everybody, it's been wonderful interviewing Richard this morning. I'm just conscious that we're coming up to the hour. If you have questions out there, there's a panel area on your GoToWebinar dashboard. Please feel free to ask Richard questions. He's been kind enough to stay on for a few minutes past the hour just to answer any questions you might have. And if you want to ask us any questions, while we have you, you're completely welcome to, and we'll do our best to discuss them and stay on for a little bit. So thank you very much, everyone who's come on. Please put your questions in, we'll take them. But just wrapping up, so next one is on the 23rd of April, just after Easter. You're all going to be working from home still, I think, so there should be time to come and listen to the wonderful Henry Rose Lee, award-winning speaker, entrepreneur and author. She talks a lot about generational transition in family businesses and diversity, and she's got some just very, very interesting things about her that inform her thoughts and her contribution to leadership, and it's really worth tuning in to listen to her. There'll be a link coming up. Sign up for the link and share it around, and hopefully these things will give you a little bit of brightness in what might be otherwise somewhat gloomy times, and we'd love to have you on board and just talking about all of these things. Meaningful Human Leadership, we had this booked in for the 18th of June 2020.
Sold out, I heard. Sold out.
Well, we'll come back. Meaningful Human Leadership will come back probably sometime in the new year. It depends on the timeline for us being allowed to come back into large groups together, but as soon as that's open, we'll put it back on and we'll have tickets open again, and we look forward to seeing you at Meaningful Human Leadership some point in the future. So it's not cancelled, it's just delayed, and we'll come back to that. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we're just going to pick up some of the questions. So I've got one question here. During the webinar, Richard, you talked about planning. Are there any particular tools that you use for planning? I'm guessing this is business planning. This is from John Ford, who's been listening this morning. And over what period do you use them?
Okay, this is going to sound dreadful. The biggest tool I have is a fountain pen and an A3 piece of blank paper. I really, that's just me, and I constantly plan, constantly do new charts, and also I tend to plan quite visually. Tend to do block diagrams. This is what I want to do. These are the sorts of things I want to do, but it's personal taste. So I couldn't recommend a particular piece of software. I just tend not to use it and rely on people around me putting it into a form that everyone else can understand. The over planning period, I try and do a lot of detail. Those maps, those posters you get where it says the view from so and so, and it's incredibly detailed, everything around you, and then as you get further and further, you get big things which are sort of quite vague. I plan in that way, so try and get the detail in the day-to-day, and as you get further and further, don't plan it in huge detail, because it's going to change. It's like the usual thing. Every plan, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Keep that. Don't devote a lot of effort to that. Just sort of know the direction. Know where the Emerald City is, so you can approximately know how to follow the yellow brick road. But don't worry too much about putting the individual bricks in the yellow brick road. The further it is away from you. And the other thing which is very important, I think, is particularly at the moment, cash. Plan your cash flow. Look at where you can cut costs. Be prudent, realistic about your revenues, and just know the reality of it. It is always better to be surprised by joy. So, be ruthlessly realistic about revenue, be incredibly brutal about your costs, but know the truth. Know the truth. Don't labor under a delusion, particularly at the moment.
Don't sugarcoat it.
Don't sugarcoat it for yourself.
C.S. Lewis there, I think. It's one of my favorite phrases. Surprised by joy. And the question from David Gray, referencing your colleague's point earlier on. What is it about working in a team that drew you out of your own business?
Loneliness. I felt incredibly lonely, just really, really lonely. And I don't that's why I would have been an incredibly useless hostage. Me and the radiator, awful. But spent
That's
all my time
awful.
talking to my God, it would have driven him nuts. No, it's just loneliness.
Interesting. And just tell me, so what's coming up? I think you're on your last day in the office today for the
Yeah.
London Chamber, and you're going to be a digital business
Well,
from.
sort of, because we still have to have people coming in because I'm afraid trade documentation is still in the 19th century. We've still got people with seals and things like that. And the reason we're doing that, great news, is people are still exporting.
Yeah,
People are still selling goods, and
yeah,
people are now thinking, how do I get good? China's now coming back online. Saying, how do we
yeah,
get those goods over here? How do I
yeah,
add value to them? How do I sell them on? So that's
yeah.
good news that I've still got to have staff in here doing that sort of thing. But yeah, I will be operating from home, and the banner will be slightly different behind me. And yeah, it's a lot of time talking and keeping engaged with my people, and also the time to plan, the time to think creatively, the time to think and it will not be business as usual when we come out. We have decided here in the
Yeah,
chamber that
yeah.
when we come out of this, this will be a radically different organisation that will come through.
Wonderful,
It will not be business as
wonderful. That's your Emerald City,
usual. Absolutely.
and your way back home. I love it. Eloise asks, how does loneliness working for yourself compare to the loneliness of being the top person in charge as a CEO when the buck stops with you?
Um, you, I think there is a difference between the buck stops with you, and I've been in that for a lot of my life, and I'm not in a job now where I used to be, where people's very lives could revolve around decisions I made.
Yeah,
I'm not in that position now, but I think there is for me, a huge emotional difference between not having colleagues and colleagues. I mean, I'm still the chief executive. I don't share that role. I don't share that responsibility, but that physical feeling of having colleagues around you is hugely important to me. I don't feel lonely as a chief executive making chief executive decisions. I really don't.
interesting.
But that's me. That's me. I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
not saying everyone should feel like that.
No, that's you. It's just authentic. So look, thank you very much. How have you enjoyed the webinar this morning?
It's been brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very
I've
much.
really enjoyed it. I
Having
really
my,
enjoyed having you on. It's been a
I
lovely
should probably
discussion.
start doing this. My corporate mug. Please notice.
So everyone who's still on, this will be up shortly in our YouTube channel and on our podcast, the audio version on the podcast. And if you want to watch the slides in the video version and see me and Richard and be curious about our backgrounds, and send us questions on those things, you can just watch the video version on YouTube. And I look forward to seeing you all on the next one with Henry Roseley, and seeing you online more frequently. So hope you have a good day. Stay safe, everybody who's still listening. Wish you all health and happiness. And we were listening recently to doctors talking about this and talking about how, in the depths of difficulty, good humour is really important. And so try and keep in good humour. Try and find the blessed in the moment, and not to ruminate too much, and not to listen too much to the news, but obviously take it seriously, but still try and keep good humour. It's good for our health to stay in good spirits.
Get outside in the morning, listen to the birds are starting to sing now, and the sunrises are gorgeous.
Yes, and reach out if you've got any problems and you want to talk, just reach out.
And be accepting to people who reach out to you.
Yeah, wonderful. Great comments. Thank you very much, and hope you have a good
Nick.
morning, everybody.